Hey, welcome back. It's December 13th and Bitcoin is still hovering around $100,000. And as I mentioned in my previous podcasts, I expect this level to be retained, at least for the remainder of December. Now, I want to dedicate this short episode around articulating what I believe to be the major catalyst for Bitcoin moving into next year, 2025. So I've just prepared really just a simple slide that will help us walk through each one of these in turn, which I think is very valuable, and it's pretty much based on what we've seen 2024, but I've also added one or two other catalysts which I think are quite unique and more applicable into the coming year. So without any further ado, let's jump into it. So the first one on the list, Bitcoin spot ETFs and advisors. So as I said earlier on in other podcasts, we have witnessed a significant milestone in terms of approving these US spot ETFs, as well as other country regulators have similarly made similar approvals of the spot ETFs in their own territories. Now, the launch of these Bitcoin spot ETFs really has gained significant momentum. And as a result, there's been tremendous amount of liquidity into the billions worth. I think it's hovering around $70 billion just for the US spot Bitcoin ETFs alone. I'm not talking about any other countries' ETFs ever since its launch of January this year. And it's set to continue, right? Because this is a perfect gateway for corporations to have exposure onto the Bitcoin underlying through these ETFs. In terms of wealth advisors, we also have witnessed a major milestone in that Morgan Stanley has become the first major Wall Street bank to allow its 15,000 financial advisors to recommend Bitcoin ETFs. What does this actually mean in practice? Well, this move would certainly signal increased institutional acceptance of Bitcoin as a legitimate asset class. Now, however, the recommendations are limited to clients with a net worth of at least $1.5 million, emphasizing the speculative nature of the investment. As we are getting more momentum and is becoming more embedded into the global financial mainstream system, it's become less of a speculative asset. But I personally treat it as a store of value, and as such, it's not, at least for me it is, it's not a speculative asset. I treat it as a long store of value because I'm interested mainly to create that intergenerational wealth in the long run. Now, point number two, as I mentioned earlier in the first point, we are seeing increases amounts of institutions and major corporations moving in large amounts of Bitcoin off the crypto exchanges. So in other words, they are buying masses upon masses of Bitcoin directly off the crypto exchanges. Now, this is a major indicator amongst many. This trend reflects growing confidence in Bitcoin as a store of value and its integration into financial strategies. The third point, tokenized Bitcoin funds and trusts are denominated as real world assets. Now, platforms like Tether's Hadron, which incidentally I made a video on that, so I encourage you to watch it in my channel, is enabling the tokenization of various assets, physical assets, analog assets, bridging that traditional finance with blockchain technology. Now, this development certainly supports Bitcoin's role as a cornerstone of the digital economy. So this is still in work in progress, but this is another catalyst that I expect to pick up in an exponential growth and momentum in 2025 and beyond. So need to watch very closely into that, because this is going to again bring surplus amount of capital and liquidity into the real world assets market, which the likes of Boston Consulting Group have made estimates that by 2030 alone, that is set to be poised as a multi-trillion-dollar industry just for real world asset, which is only a part of the blockchain technology wave. So that is interesting. At the fourth point, cheap money era is set to continue. Well, certainly it is set to continue because we are witnessing more interest rate cuts even in the December suite of meetings from the Bank of England, from the Fed, who just potentially pivot to rate cuts in 2025 as well, right? So the train ride of the cheap money era is certainly going to continue to 2025. And what would that mean? Well, that would increase more liquidity into the financial markets, which would also benefit the likes of Bitcoin and indeed other risk-on assets. Now, additionally, the ongoing global economic shifts may further Bitcoin's narrative as a hedge against traditional financial stability. I think this is the key point that I want to convey to you on point number 4. Now, MicroStrategy, we've heard an awful lot about MicroStrategy, and they're repositioning it into a Bitcoin treasury reserve company, whilst at the same time they're still operating its core business, which is the business intelligence enterprise software company, right? So they kind of have those two growth engines in the company. Now, just to explain a little bit more about MicroStrategy, because it is certainly, again, going to be a major catalyst. It has started the catalyst change this year. So let me just delve into a little bit more about what it's trying to achieve. MicroStrategy is trying to become a pivotal catalyst in the Bitcoin ecosystem through its aggressive accumulation strategy of buying more Bitcoin and holding on to those Bitcoin in its corporate treasury reserve. That is like the main goal, the ultimate goal for MicroStrategy. Now, what are the two key mechanisms or drivers that would help them out on this journey? Well, you might have heard a mention on ATM equity offering. Now, this is MicroStrategy's at the market equity program, which essentially means is it allows it to issue new shares, new company shares, and use the proceeds of that to acquire Bitcoin. Now, this strategy provides flexibility to accumulate Bitcoin at scale while taking advantage of favorable market conditions. So this is the first driver, the first part. The second part, which is the denominated convertible bonds. Now, what are convertible bonds? Now, the company has issued several convertible bonds, leveraging low interest debt to fund Bitcoin purchases. That's pretty much what it's all about. These instruments intend to allow bondholders to convert their investments into equity, benefiting from Bitcoin's appreciation indirectly through MicroStrategy's stock performance. This is what convertible bonds are about. So these two approaches, the ATM approach and the convertible bonds, these are the two approaches that would enable MicroStrategy to acquire more Bitcoin, and by acquiring more Bitcoin, they can hold it on their corporate treasury reserves and hold it into the long run. In fact, Marcus himself have pledged in many announcements that he would never going to sell his Bitcoins as after he's made these acquisitions. So this is the MicroStrategy catalyst that has been established in 2024, and I expect this to continue to ramp up when we move into 2025. And then finally, the major catalyst, because I made a video yesterday on this as well, I've touched on this point on strategic Bitcoin reserve and the global competition. Now, the US states have actually introduced SBI legislations that would enable multiple US states, spearheaded by organizations like the Satoshi Act Fund. Now, this organization has been pivotal to enable the US states to take this decentralized approach to adopt Bitcoin in its state level. Now, these states aim to allocate a percentage of their reserves to Bitcoin, seeing it as a hedge against inflation and as a strategic asset for future financial security. Now, take the example of Pennsylvania. This has been the first state in the US where they've adopted SBR in its state treasury, which I think what they've done there is they've allowed up to 10% of the state funds, right, to be invested into Bitcoin, which sets a precedent certainly for others to follow. States like Texas and Wyoming are also exploring similar measures, emphasizing Bitcoin's role in safeguarding economic sovereignty. Now, this is what the US states are doing. What I also would expect is with the Bill of Rights from Cynthia Lummis, which is one of the senators in the Republican Party, when Trump comes into office in January, I would expect that rampant piece of bill to be ushered through Congress and the House of Representatives under swift approval and incorporate Bitcoin SBR at the US federal level. I expect that to happen very soon once he occupies office in January. Now, what is the repercussion of this strategy in terms of the other nation states out there? Well, we've seen El Salvador, as we all know, they were the first nation to adopt Bitcoin as a legal tender. El Salvador continues to lead with its Bitcoin-backed bonds, and mining projects powered by renewable energy. I find this interesting. And this is, again, another catalyst which I've forgotten to add in here, is the mix between Bitcoin mining and exploiting the renewable energy in the various countries that have it as an incentive driver to mine more Bitcoin and include that wealth into its stockpile in the national treasury. So this is very interesting, particularly for developing nations like El Salvador and other countries are adopting the same approach. Now, in the case of Bhutan, Bhutan has been quietly mining Bitcoin ever since 2019, leveraging its abundant hydroelectric resources. Meanwhile, Russian lawmakers have proposed creating a Bitcoin reserve as part of their broader strategy to counteract Western sanctions and diversify reserves. So in the case of the European Union, countries like Germany and the Czech Republic are engaging in legislative discussions about Bitcoin, driven by its potential to strengthen their economies and attract innovation. Germany in particular has seen proposals for integrating Bitcoin into national treasuries. Now, the stockpiling nature of Bitcoin, which is always works hand in hand with this strategic Bitcoin reserve. One thing is passing legislation to include Bitcoin as a strategic reserve in a national treasury, but the other part of the equation is stockpiling more Bitcoins through Bitcoin mining in the countries that have adopted SPR. This is the other side of the coin. Now, I expect this to be another major catalyst into next year, because there is going to be that race to accumulate and mine more Bitcoin, because the limited supply nature of Bitcoin, it's only 21 million coins as a cap, adds urgency for nations to stockpile the asset before prices escalate further. And then the national security angle. If you hold Bitcoin, nations can reduce the reliance on traditional fiat reserves, including taxation or inflation, particularly the US dollar, and mitigate risks associated with geopolitical tensions and economic sanctions. Now, this list of the 6 major catalysts I would expect to see come into fruition next year and beyond. This is where the explosive nature and the bulls and the mega candlesticks is going to become more of a normality as we get into these catalysts into 2025. So for the investors out there who haven't really begun their journey to allocate part of their wealth into Bitcoin, I think now is really the window time is becoming. It worked out like this. Now it's roughly closing its doors, and you're going to be left with very little room to even acquire a single Bitcoin, and certainly at a price that we are in at the moment, which is $100,000. Of course, there may be some drawdowns, but I don't think the drawdowns of the past is going to dictate the same level of drawdowns that we're going to see in the future. As the asset itself is becoming more embedded into the financial stream, it's currently 2 trillion plus market capitalization, so that's the amount of investment into the Bitcoin ecosystem. As more and more liquidity comes into the Bitcoin network, there's going to be less of volatility as it becomes more embedded into the financial mainstream system. And the window of opportunity is going to be going smaller and smaller. And you're only going to be left in a position, which is fine as well, to buy individual Satoshis as opposed to a single whole Bitcoin. So hopefully you found this episode enlightening and gives you that in further insight as to what I generally believe to be the major catalyst into next year. If you enjoyed today's episode, I really appreciate your support to like and subscribe my channel, because I regularly post some interesting podcasts such as these to do with Bitcoin and anything to do with blockchain technology and the future of finance. So I'll see you next time.